Hi everyone, it's David from Automotive Press. As you guys know, I love Toyota 4RUNNERs. In fact, I own 7 different ones over the years, from a limited model to TRD Pros, and I'm driving a 2024 5th gen right now, and I'm in love again because this thing is solid, drives like a tank, and will probably last a lifetime. In fact, I'm so convinced that this generation of 4RUNNER is perhaps the best version yet that I'm going to give you 30 reasons why this thing will last 30 years. Let's go. Welcome back. So the first reason why this thing could last 30 years is the fact that this is not just built in Japan, as you can see with a J in the VIN number here, but also it's built in the legendary Tahara plant, which is perhaps the best factory in the world. They have the most experienced production workers, the best engineers, and best manufacturing technicians that can build this thing to the highest standard. And let me show you specifically what I mean by that, which is my second reasons, and that is the tolerance of the body panels and body alignment. This thing is so well built that it is 2.8 millimeter of a gap, going up to about 2.9 over here, but completely flush and in line with each other. And even between the front fender and door is barely 2.9 millimeter there, a bit wider here at 3.1 and back to 3.0. So the gaps are absolutely narrow. The panel fit and alignment is almost perfect. And you can see the precision of the entire panel. It just looks like a one piece of metal. And you know that very experienced people that are called Takumi are checking and making this panel look absolutely perfect. So that's the second reason. The third reason why this thing's gonna last a long time is because the paint job is also almost perfect. There are some orange peel, as you always see in Toyota models, but the thickness of the paint, the quality of the paint, the way they cure in the oven is second to none. Just because it's using a bit of an old-fashioned method, which means that paint is a little bit thicker than normal, as you'll see here, because it's showing 160 microns, and most new Toyota models are around 100 microns now. They're getting thinner and thinner by the day because of the fact that they want to save money and time and also save the amount of paint they use. But the 4RUNNER is still averaging about 116. I think if I just measure one more here, 127. So you can tell it's a little bit thicker overall, and also just the way they apply the paint at the Tahara factory, where I've been to many times, I just know that these paint are very durable and it's going to last a very long time. You still may want to put a wrap or something if you really want it to last 30 years. But right now, I'm very confident that the Tahara-built 4RUNNER's paint will last many decades to come. The fourth reason is the obvious one, and that is this powertrain. Proven, reliable, simple, and easy to work with. This 4-liter V6 engine is used in many different models. In fact, it's even used in the Land Cruiser 300 series that are sold in Asia and Middle East and Europe and elsewhere. They're still using the 4-liter V6 because they know this thing simply won't break down. And it's not just me saying it. If you talk to Ahmed from Car Care Nut, he also talks about the fact that this engine is simple and it's proven and it's going to last a very long time if you take care of it. And you know what? It doesn't have a lot of power or torque, but this thing is absolutely robust and rugged and reliable, and no doubt one of the best built engines in the world. The fifth reason is all the rest of the powertrain as well, not just the engine, but everything that's connected to it, because we don't have a hybrid, we don't have a mild hybrid, there's nothing else other than the engine and the transmission over here. So you know that whole thing is very simple to operate. There's lots of space and room to work in this engine bay. And there's nothing here that's super complicated or very advanced because it's using old technology. But sometimes old technology is the best technology because they just don't break down. So it is a 5-speed automatic transmission. It's somewhat slow in terms of how it shifts, and it's not the best transmission out there, but it's built like a tank as well, along with the engine. And there are very few problems I ever hear about either the engine or the transmission or anything else that's in the engine bay, because this thing has been around for such a long time. The sixth reason is to do with the body mechanics and body structure, because this thing is, again, built like a tank, because it's also all steel panels. There's no aluminum panels in this 4RUNNER. Let me close the hood. Thump. Whether it's the hood or the door, it has that solid thump feel to it, because this is an old-fashioned body design. There's no light materials, and these metals are also thicker than most of the newer modern cars, because they keep thinning out both aluminum and the metal panels to try to save weight and save money. And so you can tell on some of the newer models, I can literally put my thumb and then bend the hood because they're one aluminum, which is softer, but also because they're so thin. But look at this. You cannot bend anything on these panels because it's absolutely solid. And the thicker the metal, of course, the longer they're going to last, because if you do end up with some rust, you can just take the rust out by grinding and then repatch it, and you'll still be solid, versus very thin aluminum panels that are used in today's modern cars, where if you do have some corrosion, because aluminum does corrode as well, and you try to fix it, then you're going to thin out the body panels even more. So no need to worry about that. This thing is solid. What about other parts of the body? Well, that's the seventh thing I'm going to point out, because even the plastic parts, it's quite a bit thicker than what you'll find in all the new models, including the 2025 4Runner, because once again, this is an old design dating back many decades when they weren't so concerned about the weight or thickness of materials, and you can literally feel just by touching this how thick and how robust all the plastic panels are. If you look at some of the newer models, not just from Toyota but from other manufacturers as well, these kind of pieces are all quite thin and they're quite flimsy, and if you happen to knock something with a mirror, for example, they break off easily, as it has happened in some of our cars in our company fleet. But all the plastic pieces are just really thick. Look at the robust tail lamp here. It's just a very different design. Maybe it's not as fancy or as good looking as some of the modern vehicles, but it's super solid. The eighth point is about the frame. As you know, this is body on the frame design, which means there's a separate body and a solid frame underneath. You can kind of see it if you look through the wheel well behind and also over here. And a lot have changed in terms of frame design, because all the new TNGA F platform vehicles, which are basically all the new Toyota models, that's body on frame, uses a different kind of frame. They're lighter, they're a little bit thinner, and what they do is they weld thicker pieces where you need strength. So it's thin, thick, thin, that kind of stuff. Therefore, they can save some weight on the frame. Whereas these older frames are thick walls throughout, all the way through, making it much more robust in some way. And yes, again, they're heavier, and therefore maybe they won't contribute to fuel efficiency just because they're heavily welded, heavy frames overall. But what you end up with is a very strong frame underneath that is also very rust resistant, because they also apply thicker undercoating and paint on those frames compared to some of the newer models. The ninth reason is about the suspension, which again is very simple. Now, it is very different depending on which model of 4Runner you buy. This is a TRD Off-Road, which is as close as you can get to a TRD Pro, but it's not quite the same because TRD Pro have Fox suspension. But regardless of which 4Runner you buy, the suspensions are also pretty straightforward and proven because they haven't changed for many years. Compared to some of the newer models from Toyota, they have everything from adaptive suspension to EKD-SS, which automatically locks and unlocks the stabilizer bar, as you will find in the new GX. Or in the new 4Runner, we also have manual override for stabilizer disconnect. So all those things are really cool and a great feature, but more complicated than you need. Whereas on this 5th gen current 4Runner, it is just a simple setup and they will last a long time. The 10th point is about the bumpers and so forth. These are plastic injection molding bumpers here, and of course there's one in the front, and then we have some moldings on the wheel wells as well. These are all manufactured in a different part of the factory, either in-house or done by the suppliers. But once again, the thickness of these plastics are quite different. The newer models on the modern vehicles have thinner plastic, and oftentimes they use more plastic in the front just because they're lighter than metal, so they try to maximize plastic, minimize metal panels, and therefore you end up with more chance of damaging it just because they're thinner plastic. But not on this generation 4Runner. All the plastic pieces, not just the tail lamp and the headlight, but the actual bumper itself, and over here, nice and thick, and that means they have a less chance of breaking down or being damaged from some kind of accidental hit due to the thickness of the actual walls themselves. Did you know that the newer modern cars all use thinner plastic and also less of these softer materials because they're cheaper and easier to manufacture? That's another thing that I want to point out, which is my 11th point. These are all softer vinyl all the way here, softer vinyl, not too many hard plastic on this 4Runner. Whereas if you look at some of the modern new models from Toyota, it's a lot of hard plastic over here because it's easier to manufacture, but they're going to be a little bit more brittle over many years. If you wait 3 or 4 decades, then they can crack. But these ones will last longer. It's also really thick. You can't quite see the thickness, but you can kind of feel it just underneath here. These materials are quite a bit thicker than what I'm used to seeing in some of the newer models. In fact, when I was at Tahara factory earlier this year, they pointed out newer technology using very thin metal to make it look like it's thick, but it's actually very thin, whereas this one is just thick altogether. Even these gaskets are bigger and thicker than in some of the modern vehicles. So the entire door panel here, even under strong sunlight and UV light, is still going to last a long time. The 12th point is also to do with a vinyl inside. Now this one is a TRD off-road. You get obviously a vinyl seats. You get real leather seats on the limited model. But regardless, you can just feel the thickness of material, but also just the way they make these materials are quite different than the modern vehicles, where again, they try to use thinner materials. Now, it doesn't mean they don't last as long just because they're thinner, because they try to make it more durable. But nothing beats thicker, old-fashioned materials like what you find here. So I think regardless of whether it's the vinyl seats or the leather seats, they tend to use kind of old-fashioned materials. You'll find that the seats will last longer as well. The 13th point is also to do with the dash, and that is all the buttons and switches are nice and big. Now we still get buttons and switches on the new 2025 4Runner as well, but these are like very simple, large switches and buttons that are proven because they've used the same switches and buttons for many different cars for many decades. So we're looking at an old-fashioned design with the common switches, and therefore these switches and buttons are being used extensively, and therefore it's very unlikely that any of these things will ever fail just because they've been around for a long time and they've engineered out all possible defects and problems. And so even the switches and buttons and so forth will last a lifetime. The 14th point is just the fact that there's less technology in the 5th gen 4Runner compared to the 6th gen or any other model for that matter. We don't have some of the more advanced and complicated technology that are now present in the newer models. And yes, they are very important because many of them are safety related, so we do welcome them. But the more technology, more hardware, more software you feature into the vehicle, the more chance that they're going to break down if you look 20, 30 years down the road. I'm sure they're fine for 10 to 15 years, but if you are going to actually keep the car for 30 years and beyond, then simpler the better. You want less hardware, you want less software, and you just want simplicity. And from that perspective, this kind of old-fashioned design is better. The 15th point is the software behind infotainment. Now, to be honest, this thing is outdated and I actually don't like this software. The newer infotainment system is far superior in terms of performance and features, but you know what? There's very little thing that can go wrong with this particular system because it is just so simple. There's not a whole lot of things you can do in this particular infotainment system, and therefore it probably won't break down or have a software issues because of the simplicity of the design. So that's another point. Did you know that when they manufacture vehicles, the whole headliner is attached or installed all at once because it comes from the supplier as a one whole unit? So I've seen many headliners before it's installed onto the vehicle, and I know for a fact the newer models have a thinner headliner. But look at these guys. Look at the actual thickness of this felt here, as well as just the overall feel. It is solid. And I can tell this thing just will not break down under UV light or under a bit of abuse. So even the headliner itself is pretty tough. The 17th point is that there aren't some really fancy electronically based luxury features on this 4Runner, such as massage chair or special illumination light. All those things again add to the potential for something breaking down. Now we don't even get a ventilation seat on this particular TRD off-road, but you do get them on the limited model, and they're kind of based on the older technology, so the fan is very noisy when you turn on the ventilation. But regardless of all that stuff, we just don't have more complicated things such as massage chair, which requires a mechanism behind the seat panel here that moves up and down or move forward and backward, and that kind of stuff is the first thing that will break down 20, 30 years down the road. So I'm glad that they don't have it, and seats are simple. We still get seat heater as well. That's all we need, and it's very simple, and therefore it's going to last a long time. As you guys know, the 4Runner has a roll down rear window, which is its iconic feature, and we're really happy that the 2025 4Runner kept that feature, and we appreciate that. But anyhow, coming at the rear here, simplicity is the name of the game. Even the buttons to open and close this window is right here. External panel is nicely padded. If you look very carefully, these are very simple rubber damped switches almost like a toggle switch type, and these things just don't break. Also, there's no power lift gate on this generation 4Runner, which of course makes it more inconvenient. But because of that, there's also no kick sensors and so forth. So the rear part of the vehicle is also very simple. We just have a roll down window with the proven rubberized switches, and that's it. Nothing else here, and therefore nothing else to go wrong. The 19th point is just a trailer here. I was talking to one of the engineers, and they said that they actually made this trailer hitch design simpler and a little bit thinner, but this one is still using the old-fashioned method, which means this trailer hitch is really thick. You can tell that it's a thick metal, and sometimes you get surface rust over here, but generally speaking, this thing is solid, and therefore it can take quite a bit of abuse and impact. And I just like the older design because, again, they're not thinning out the materials, and this thing is, well, rock solid. The 20th point is kind of interesting one, and that is to do with the rear wiper blade. If you notice, on this generation 4Runner, the wiper is neatly tucked underneath the spoiler, away from everything, and it wipes this way. If you notice, all the newer models have the wiper motors actually located right here, and it wipes this way. And there are two reasons for that. One is cost cutting. They say it's cheaper to put it here than to hide it over there. And second reason is that on some vehicles, now they have a digital rear view mirror, which requires the camera to be located just behind the glass over here, so they can't put the wiper there. But in terms of long-term effect and in terms of durability, it's always better to have it here because it's away from debris, away from the environment, and it's hidden behind the spoiler, so it's well protected, and therefore this type of design will make it last longer. So now I'm driving the 4Runner, and I'm going to talk about the 21st point, which is to do with the steering mechanism. This one uses an old-fashioned hydraulic power steering, which is really rare these days because 99% of cars out there all turn into electric power steering or EPS, and there are very few vehicles that are still left with hydraulic, but this one is one of them. And the reason why they switched to EPS is simply because it's more fuel efficient, and you can also add electronics to the system, such as the vibration that comes through the steering when you go outside the lane and so forth. So there are many reasons to switch to EPS, but in terms of engineering and manufacturing and simplicity, hydraulic power steering is the name of the game because it's solid, it's proven, it's easy to service, and it does take up a space in the engine bay, but it's simple to operate and maintain. And most of all, I love the feeling of the hydraulic power steering. You get great feedback from the road, you get good sensation, and much of that is lost in electric power steering, so I don't like the EPS, even some of the newer ones, and that's another reason why I really love this generation of the 4Runner. 22nd point is the actual drivetrain underneath. This one is TRD off-road and not limited, so it doesn't have a full-time all-wheel drive. Instead, it has the part-time four-wheel drive, and I have to shift into four-wheel drive low or high. But again, this thing is really simple design. It's been around for a long time, and many different Toyota models are using this same system. It's nothing complicated, easy to service, easy to maintain. So I like this four-wheel drive system in the 5th gen because I know that it's going to last a long time. The 23rd point is the windows. I'm driving over some bumpy road, you can tell, but the car is actually very quiet because in the older models, the glass thickness of all the windows are maybe 5 to 8% thicker than newer models. The newer models are using thin glass just to save weight and save money, and that's why sometimes you have to pay extra money on some models to get the additional thicker glasses. Sometimes they call it acoustic glass. But it just simply means that those glasses have either different layers sandwiched or they're a little bit thicker, whereas in the old-fashioned 4Runner like this one, well, you can tell the glass is pretty thick, and that makes it harder for these glass to break, and therefore it might last a little bit longer. The 24th point is just the shifting mechanism. The actual shifter is simple, it's still traditional, toggle up and down. It's not electronic, it's not button, and I don't have a paddle shifter on this vehicle as well. Again, the more complication, the more features you add, the more chance they can break down into the future. So I just like simplicity, and therefore I like the shifting mechanism on the current Gen 4Runner because I really have a very strong dislike for all the newer models, regardless of whether it's Toyota or not, where you have to either push a button to shift or move it in a complicated way to shift into reversal drive. And I just know that those electronics can break down 20-30 years down the road because they don't even feel smooth to begin with, and the electronics behind it is just a little bit more complicated. The 25th point is something you will only know if you understand manufacturing. but that is to do with the welding of these body panels. If you look at this 4Runner here, the 5th gen, everything is spot welded. Now what you see here is actually adhesive. These are kind of like a sealer, so these seals the panels together, but underneath are all spot welding. You can see here, for example, and spot welding is the toughest, strongest type of welding. It's so strong that in order to, let's say, take the two panels apart for destructive testing, we have to use a wedge and a hammer and really hit it hard to tear apart. The spot welding is absolutely tough and strong, and that type of welding you use out for an entire car, the doors, the hood, the front fenders, and the roof. There's some other type of arc welding used over here as well, but for the most part, it is all spot welded, which is tough and strong, and they just don't break apart. The newer technology uses either adhesive, we call it structural adhesive, or they use laser welding, which is faster and more efficient, but they're just not quite as tough in terms of long-term durability. Obviously, they pass all the safety tests and crash tests, so there's no concern about safety at all. If I had a choice between old-fashioned spot welding or a structural adhesive, I'm going to take the spot welding anytime. What other reasons can I give you in terms of why the 4Runner, this particular generation that is, will last so many years, maybe 30 years or beyond? Well, for one thing, because this car has been around for so long and the mechanics, including engine and everything else, is so simple and straightforward, any mechanic can fix your vehicle if it's a 5th generation 4Runner. That means the parts are also readily available, and you don't need any expensive or difficult or complicated equipment to diagnose issues because it's not hybrid. There's no high voltage wires and so forth, and therefore you're more likely to maintain it and tune it and fix it when something goes wrong, compared to maybe more complicated and advanced modern vehicles where they might need some newer equipment, and because it might cost more to fix and parts are more difficult to get, you might not fix it and therefore they can break down. So that's another reason, which is my 26th reason, in the sense that this will be easy to fix by any mechanic around. The 27th point is the fact that many of these parts are bolted on instead of clipped on. So all these parts right here are solidly bolted on to the other parts of the body, and many of these things are not clipped on, including some of the stuff in the interior, compared to newer generation models such as the 2025 4Runner, where many parts might just be clipped on for ease of manufacturing and also simplicity and just low manufacturing cost. But they might not be as durable because these clips can come off upon, let's say, low speed impact, such as the parking lot columns and so forth. So once again, this is going to last longer just because the parts are bolted on tight and secure compared to a newer vehicle, which may have many parts that are clipped on instead. 28th point is to do with the underside, which I can't really show you, but the differentials are actually made with cast iron in the case of 5th gen 4Runner versus aluminum in the newer Toyota model. So once again, more durable and almost impossible to break when the differentials are cast iron because it's a solid cast iron. And obviously, if you hit something, it's going to be stronger and more durable compared to aluminum differential. So that's another reason as well. 29th point is the fact that because this 5th gen 4Runner has been around for so long, there are so many third-party companies, aftermarket companies, and accessories builders that you can actually customize this 4Runner to make it tougher and stronger and more durable. So for example, if you are planning to do some off-roading, you can add rock rollers over here, again built by many different companies. You can also upgrade the wheels and tires. You can also replace these bumpers and with more rugged steel bumpers as well. All those accessories are available and actually quite affordable just because this 4Runner has been around for a long time, and therefore many companies had a chance to design and develop something that fits this exactly. And that will allow you to create a 4Runner that's tougher and stronger than ever before, perhaps tougher and stronger than when you first bought it, allowing you to keep it longer and more mileage than ever before. It will just stay tough and strong with all the different kind of aftermarkets that are possible. The 30th and the very last point I'm going to talk about in terms of why this 5th gen 4Runner might last 30 years or longer if you take care of it is simply the way it drives. In other words, don't take my words for it. Take it for a spin, drive around the city, drive on the highway, on the gravel road and some bumpy road, and you will understand exactly why this thing will last a long time. It is absolutely rock solid, drives like a tank, not a hint of squeaks or rattles, and I can tell you as a manufacturing engineer how well built this thing is from top to bottom, inside out. This thing is absolutely solid, and it makes you feel like no other SUV out there, because too many modern SUVs are now using aluminum and light components and light materials, and they just feel kind of flimsy when you drive around town and especially over bumpy road, whereas this one here, the 5th gen 4Runner, just feels absolutely tight. And that is my last proof and evidence that the 4Runner could last a lifetime, 30 years or more, because the whole thing is built so well to the highest standard at the best factory in the world, which is Tahara, using the same method and same processes as how the Lexus are being built. So the standards are high, the actual manufacturing capability is high, and you can tell just by driving it. So again, don't take my words for it, just go and drive it, try it, feel it, and you'll know exactly what I mean by the fact that this thing feels solid, and you know personally and by experience that this thing can last a very long time, as long as you actually maintain it and do proper maintenance, because ultimately that's one of the determining factor whether a car can last a very long time. So I hope you enjoyed my video in terms of 30 reasons why I believe the 5th gen 4Runner can last 30 years or longer, again, if you take care of it. If you enjoyed my video, please give me a thumbs up, make some comments, and if you haven't done so yet, would you kindly subscribe as well. Until next video, I'm signing off for now. Thank you so much.